Hello, everyone. The webinar will begin in approximately 2 minutes. 2 minutes. All right. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Regenified, Verifying Your Hard Work. We're really excited about this webinar this evening. It's a chance for us to show the possibilities that can be had as we move down the regenerative path. Have with us this evening from the Regenified team, Samantha Buckingham and Kathleen Leverenz. They're going to discuss with you just what is Regenified, how the program works, and what it means to farmers and ranchers. And then after their presentation, we're going to bring on 3 different farms that are actually verified and certified Regenified. We have with us Steve Groff, Derek and Tanis Axton, and Brandon Bach. So we'll have a panel, ask them some questions, and then you have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters or to the panelists. Please type your questions into the Q&A, and then we will ask them after we're done visiting with the farmers. So at this time, rather than me give introductions and tell you about each of the presenters, I'm going to let them tell us a little bit about who they are and how they arrived at Regenified. With that, I'll turn it over to Samantha Buckingham. Samantha?
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gabe. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're looking forward to chatting with you today. And as Gabe said, we have a bit of an agenda where we're going to be chatting through, how we're working with folks today, some of the value that we're seeing with our farmers and ranchers and ensuring they get that recognition and reward. And, so important that you hear from our farmers directly. So we're thrilled to have some of our certified farmers joining us. And let's dive into a bit of background. I think it's, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce ourselves, a bit about our background and how it is that we have the pleasure of speaking with you all today. So my name is Samantha Buckingham. I'm the Director of Farmer Experience. What does that mean at Regenified? It means, me and my team, we understand that farmers are the heart of our business, so we're working really hard to support our Regenified farmers through introducing them to the program, supporting them through the verification process, building relationships. So much of regenerative is a story, really understanding and hearing their story so we can share that story, when we work with Kathleen's team and with brands, so we can help tell that story for them and they can see those higher premiums. Ultimately, I guess my background, I spent 13 years in corporate business and development in the technology sector. So doing things like strategic planning, market analysis, business development, relevant skills. But that's not what got me here today at Regenified. that's a bit of a personal health journey that started about 17 years ago. So I had a mysterious health condition that ended up being very closely linked to the food that I was eating, what I was putting in my body. So you can imagine that someone like me was quite intrigued to click on a movie called Kiss the Ground when they saw it come up on Netflix, and the rest is history. So I'm very passionate about food and the way food is grown. You'll notice here I put future farm owner on here. I do a lot in my suburban backyard with vegetables for my family, but I'm definitely looking to increase my acreage one day. And so believe me, I love chatting with you folks. I'm always taking notes, and I'm definitely learning a lot.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Leverins. My role at Regenified is Director of Retail Partnerships and CPG. And if you don't know, CPG is just another word for brands, basically consumer brands. So that's my role at Regenified. I sit in a similar role as Samantha. We actually work very closely together. But as she works with farmers, I work with brands. As a company, we realized that it was really important to create a network of brands that were really committed to this movement so that we could connect those brands with the farmers that are doing the amazing hard work. So that's my role, both to work with the brands and also to connect those brands and the farmers directly with retailers that are also making commitments around regenerative agriculture. As far as how I came here, my background is in grocery retail. I was at Whole Foods Market for 11 years. I started there in a nutritionist role, did some marketing roles, but for the last 6 years, I was in a purchasing role. So I was making purchasing decisions around new brands to launch into Whole Foods. So I got to work with a lot of great emerging brands and entrepreneurs in that way. I love that role. It was really a fun, exciting job to have. But I'm even more excited to be here. I feel like this role actually ties together sort of my educational background as well. My education is in public health and nutrition, and I'm really excited, especially about the nutrient density that we're seeing in the regeneratively grown products. We're doing some testing, getting some really cool results, and I'll share a little bit of that later in the presentation.
Very good. Thanks. So before we dive into our certification, I want to take a step back and look at why certification matters at all. We're seeing real momentum these days. There's people I'm speaking to, pioneers in the space. They're describing this as the snowball. It's rolling down the hill a little bit more. There really seems to be a real shift towards interest in this in a big way. And that's what the research is showing us here as well. So these are some research points that we found in some studies. SPIN research is showing us that 20%, there's a 20% increase in the sale of regenerative products in 2023 over the previous year. Nielsen data is showing us that 54% of consumers are really intrigued by regenerative, what it is. They're interested in trying regenerative products. And 75% of consumers are still looking for certifications when they're buying those products. I think that's so important. So much of this movement is consumer driven, and it's very confusing and it's very hard out there. And, many of them are very busy and they're looking for that shorthand, and so much of this is consumer driven. It's worth sharing, movies like, Common Ground, Kiss the Ground, these documentaries, they're reaching people in a very big way. I can personally attest to that. So really, really grateful for the exposures that these documentaries are getting. It's really helping all of us. And with that momentum, is great opportunity, but that also leaves us very vulnerable to risk, and with that, I mean greenwashing. We've seen this happen before. It really degrades the trust. So, standardization really helps create that framework so that we're preventing those vague claims from diluting the legitimate actions of everyone who's putting in those regenerative practices. Certification also protects the narrative around regenerative ag by providing a framework. So, if we're all working towards a similar goal or a shared goal, the impact that we could be having is much bigger. And as I said, consumers are a big focus. It's essentially that mark of trust that they need to invest in products that they believe in, and pay more ultimately for those products. And that's certainly what we're seeing here. So all this talk about standards and definitions, I think it's worth sharing, what our definition here is Regenified for regenerative, which is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, starting with all life in the soil and moving to all life above the soil. So we're founded by Gabe Brown, Dr. Alan Williams, and Doug Peterson, really with the intention of protecting the narrative around what regenerative is. It's too important not to. So really, the intention is to have a standard that's got rigor, that's got real teeth, that we hold our farmers to, while also recognizing that it's a journey. Regenerative isn't a switch you flick on overnight. It takes time. So how are we going to hold farmers to that high standard while also recognizing them and rewarding them early on? And that's really how it comes together. Our mission is to transition the world's supply chain to regenerative agriculture. And how we do that is we verify farms and ranches, so verifying those operations and certifying the products that come off of those operations so that we can connect them more directly with brands, effectively simplifying and shortening that supply chain, again, higher premiums in the process. And at the end of the chain there, consumers are getting a product that they recognize and trust and have full confidence in. And a big focus, and what we're working on in a big way, particularly with brands, is validating that supply chain, so that our producers don't sell into conventional bins. So a lot of that is looking at traceability, segregation, all of that comes together and has a real impact. So transitioning the world's supply chain to regenerative is a big task. This is how we see it coming together. I mentioned that regenerative is a journey. It's not an in or out system. It's not a pass or fail. How we look at the system is with that percentage there is percentage of land that's regeneratively managed according to the 634 protocol that we use. So if you've got under 20% of the operation regeneratively managed against those protocols, you're welcome to be a part of the community. There's real benefit there. There's no seal on pack, but you do get to make the claim that you've made a commitment, a formal commitment to regenerative practices and principles. Tier 2, all the way up to Tier 5, that's where you get the use of the seal on pack. So Tier 2 is 20 to 40%, all the way up to Tier 5, 80 to 100%. So again, you don't have to come in at the entry level, starting at Tier 1. You come in where you're at. So we do the work to evaluate where you are in that journey, and we don't let people come in and just sit. That's not the intention. The intention is to progress. So you've got 3 years to progress to the next tier until you reach that Tier 5. I mentioned the 634 protocols. Again, this is how we evaluate operations. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. I think many of you are quite familiar. It's the similar protocols to, it's the same protocols to Soil Health Academy and Understanding Ag. This is that really thorough look at the operation. We're looking at both practices and outcomes. What is the day-to-day management on that land, and what's the long-term effect? So 6 principles of soil health, 3 rules of adapted stewardship are your principles. 4 ecosystem processes, those are your outcomes. And we're coming on site. It's an annual boots on the ground field evaluation. So once a year, we send a Regenified verifier out. They're collecting up to 65 data points, looking at everything from your soil health to your water cycling to your biodiversity. We've also do lab testing. So we do our soil testing, our PLFA and Haney test. Kathleen's going to talk about this a little bit later on, but we're very excited to be sharing nutrient density testing now with our Regenified farmers. I think that's going to have a real big impact. And I think this is a really great story to share. So this is our progress to date. We've been around for 18 months, but also this speaks to what I said earlier, like the momentum around this movement. This is our growth here at Regenified, which is what we can speak to, but overall, there does seem to be a real interest. So to date, in the last 18 months, we verified over 1 million acres. So everything from crops to cattle to cotton and coffee and even timberland. So we've seen a lot. That's brought us to multiple countries, but also multiple continents. So we've done verifications in Africa, South America, in Europe. We get interest from governments and other companies, even within Australia and New Zealand. So we're certainly getting lots of demand these days for information. And then brands, working with over 20 brands, brand relationships. And this is important because these are the buyers, right? These are essentially our farmers are providing supply at scale for a lot of these brands. So we're very focused this year to see that number grow. That's going to have the biggest impact on our farmer network. And the goal really is to have higher premiums. There are never any guarantees. You're going to see a massive swing here, a massive range. It really depends, right? I mean, it depends on your geography. It depends on the product. But, there's typically one of three, value adds, right? So there's the opportunity for higher premiums. There's also access to new markets, a competitive advantage, and then information, very detailed information and valuable learnings about your operation and your practices.
I'm going to jump in here, and I want to build off of Sam's point about higher premiums, because I think the nutrient density testing results that we're getting back now are really just a great and objective justification for those higher premiums. And it's something that I'm personally super excited about with my background in nutrition and, personal interest in health, obviously, like many of us. But here's just one example. We've actually tested a few different products that are certified Regenified. The one I'm going to talk through today is certified Regenified ground beef. We tested this on a couple levels. One of them is omega 6:3 ratios. This ratio, you're wanting to see it as close to 1 as possible. That's when those omegas are balanced, and this is most quite closely tied to the best health outcomes. So that's why we really want to get those in our diet. The exciting thing here is that the certified Regenified beef is very close to wild-caught salmon. I'm sure many of you have heard, wild-caught salmon is sort of like the golden child in healthy fats. So I think it's really exciting that we're seeing the certified Regenified beef be really comparable to that. And obviously you can see here it's outperforming both conventional and grass-fed. And to date, sort of grass-fed was like the meat all-star in healthy meat. So I think this is really exciting data. Next slide. The other thing that I wanted to share with you was around phytochemicals. And again, like the omegas, phytochemicals are tied to a lot of really positive health outcomes when you have them in your diet. And here we're seeing that the certified Regenified beef is 2.7 times higher than conventional. That's really significant. And again, outperforming both grass-fed and conventional. And this is sort of, this nutrient density piece is really how I see us closing the gap in that customer education. Sam touched on it, that customers are really starting to understand this movement. But I think for the ones that haven't gotten there yet, really understanding the personal value to them that they're going to, if they buy a certified Regenified piece of meat, they're actually getting a higher nutrition. I think that sort of speaks to people's more, selfish nature, that they really want to know that they're getting bang for their buck when they buy something like this. So I think it's really exciting. And one little story to share about how much people are interested is that one of our farmers shared on social media about her results in nutrient density testing. And she shared this like 2 weeks ago, and she's already gotten about 1 million views, or over 1 million views, I believe. So that just really speaks to the public interest in this topic.
1.2 million and counting.
1.2 million. Okay.
and I'll just chime in here too, because I mean, I'm just so excited about this. And, speaking from a consumer standpoint, we've got whiplash, it's so often, eat this, not that. Wait a minute, that's not good anymore. Is organic good or bad? It's confusing. It's very confusing. So what this means to me is, it's so objective. And in my mind, what it's doing is I feel nourished. when I'm eating these products. And that's a big shift. And again, that's a shift that many people are looking to partake in and pay for, quite frankly.
Exactly. Thank you. So now I want to, we talked about sort of like the groundswell in the customer movement, and I think that's leading to more interest from the retailers to engage in the regenerative agriculture movement. And I want to talk a little bit about what their motivations are for that. One of the things that they're saying they are really looking for is that third-party certification or verification. A lot of retailers are interested in engaging in this movement, but they don't want to be caught in a tricky position where they've made a commitment or said that these products are regenerative and then it turns out they're not. So they really want to avoid greenwashing, and to do that, they're looking to third-party certifications to verify that what they are saying is true and they can really stand behind these products. The other thing that all of us love is the story behind regenerative farms, and retailers really appreciate that too. They know that it resonates with customers. They love telling those stories. Many times there's beautiful pictures that come with it. That's great for marketing materials. So the retailers really love to use this moment as a marketing moment. And we just were talking to one of our supplier brands this week, and they said that this spring this fall, they're actually getting some extra marketing material that's going to get put out in stores because the retailer wants to talk about regenerative farming. They're going to use their farm as an example of this. So it's really nice to see that, not only are the retailers investing in this, but they're getting behind it to give the brands that are working in this space a little extra attention and support. And at the end of the day, the retailers are trying to align their values with the values of their customers. And, as we touched on earlier, the customers are really starting to ask for this. So the retailers are following suit. So it's really exciting to see everybody coming on board. And I have a couple examples of who is coming on board now. So these are some of these retailers we work directly with, but these are all retailers that have made public declarations that they care about regenerative agriculture. They're making commitments to give brands shelf space, to make purchasing decisions. We're hearing from brands that they're getting calls and meetings with buyers just because they have regenerative claims. So these are the retailers that are really looking to support the movement. Whole Foods, for example, is one that I know very closely. So one little story here is that next week, a few of us are going to Expo West, which is really the biggest CPG brand conference in the country every year. There's like 60,000 to 80,000 people that are there. One of the top executives at Whole Foods was just interviewed on the website, and they asked her what is she looking for at Expo West, and she said a few sort of generic things like innovation, new flavors, but the only specific thing she said was regenerative. And so we were really excited to see that brands have reposted that, so that's really cool to see. And then on the other side of this slide are some brands that have made big commitments. Some of these are our clients as well, but these are brands that are looking to source regenerative ingredients for their products, or they're transitioning their own supply chain. So just a couple examples here. Maker's Mark, I'm sure everybody knows, they've made a regenerative commitment in a huge way. They just bottled their first regeneratively grown bourbon this November. So that, it's going to take 7 years to age. So it won't be out on the shelves for a while, but we're really excited that they've done that. The bigger thing here is that they've actually committed to transition their entire supply chain to regenerative by 2025. This is like a huge goal. It's a very quick turnaround for the commitment. And, we're hearing from other brands that they make commitments 10, 20 years out. It's very, very inspiring to see a brand as big as Maker's Mark make a commitment that's coming so quickly. Another example here is King Arthur Baking. I just wanted to touch on them because it kind of speaks to the higher premiums that we're seeing. They have a flour that's out in the market now, and they have a higher premium on that, about 36% higher than organic. So that's really giving back to the farms that are growing regeneratively with that product. Jump on to the next slide.
Yeah, and I guess it's a quick point too about Whole Foods, because they're made a very big commitment, right, to elevate and protect the regenerative claim. And I think it's worth sharing. Last year, they decided to require all seals on pack that had a regenerative claim to go out and get a third-party certification. So we're quite proud to be one of 3 approved seals for Whole Foods. And that does a lot to improve recognition, right? You think about all the consumers in Whole Foods who are picking up products, seeing products in aisle. If they don't recognize the seal, at least there's curiosity there, right? To Google and see, what does this mean? What is this about? So that's an opportunity that I think we're really appreciative of.
That's a really great point. And they're also, I mean, they've made their commitments publicly. They listed last year how many regenerative products they had on shelf in 2023, and they're going to put that report out again, and they're looking to increase it. So they're putting these commitments out there publicly, and so they're going to be held to them, which is good.
And the more brands, right, like the more they put out those claims, the more brands are interested in creating those products, and again, filters down the supply. So we love seeing that.
Absolutely. And so I've been sort of talking about the retailers and the brands that are making big commitments, and I want to just tie it back to the farms and how does this relate back to you? I wanted to share this slide because this is what we give to brands that are looking to get certified. We do require that they have a product that is made up at least 75% to 100% of Regenified certified ingredients. So what that means for farmers is that often, you know, we have brands that have a multi-ingredient product. They have farms that are certified for some of the product, but if it's not all of the product, we have to go into our network, find them ingredient suppliers that can supply them the products. So we're really trying to get these brands online so that we can bolster up the market for the farmers that are doing the hard work and creating these really excellent regenerative products.
Okay, so before we move over to our farmer panel and ultimately our Q&A, I wanted to take a moment to get ahead of probably the most burning question I get every day, which is how much does verification cost? And so is it cost per unit? Is it $2 an acre? It is not. Is it $10,000 per field? No, it is not. Is it 10% of your revenue? Absolutely not. You know, we do not think it is fair to assign a unit price. You know, much like how we look at your operations, our cost is custom. You know, we look at your context, we look at your operation, and we put together a custom quote. So a couple details that we gather is, you know, how many acres you have, what's on those acres, how are those acres organized? You know, really what that's telling us is, you know, how many soil samples do we need to be taking? You know, if you've got, you know, discontinuous tracks, how far apart are they? You know, that tells us from a soil sample perspective, as well as from, you know, sending a verifier out. So from a time and travel perspective, what it will take. So the cost that we put together is an all-inclusive price, and we work hard to bundle that and share that with you. So. With that, I wanted to move over to our farmer panel. As I said, we're really thrilled to have some of these folks on the call today to share their experience firsthand. So I'm gonna kick off with some specific questions for our panelists, and then at the end of the Q&A, feel free to also address questions to them. I know they're happy to share some of these details. As I said, Derek and Tanis Axton, grain farmers from Saskatchewan. We've got Steve Groff, who's a vegetable farmer from Pennsylvania, and Brandon Bach, who's a grain farmer from North Dakota. And all of them are leaders in the regenerative space. So I guess with that, I'll maybe kick off with the first question for Derek and Tanis. And what I'd love to hear is, you know, why did you choose to become certified as regenerative, and why now?
Oh, thanks, Sam. Why did we become certified? There's a long list of reasons, but we've just really been witness to a lot of greenwashing lately, and you know, and honestly, Tanis and I, we've been at this for 15 years. And you know, back when we started making changes on our farm, it was mostly just to build resilience in our operation. And then we didn't, you know, we were just trying to make use of the water as best we could. And anyway, one thing led to another, and it turns out there's a market for the way we farm now. And you know, in the last couple of years, we just witnessed a tremendous amount of greenwashing, and we really wanted to separate ourselves from the rest, and you know, align ourselves with people with, you know, similar mindsets. And I think this looks like it's the way forward. And I guess why? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I guess why now? It just, I guess for people who don't know, like in our operation, like we have a grain farm, but then we also have a processing facility, and we've added a flour mill to that. And we have been, I guess, struggling from like our marketing has been struggling a bit, just because people simply don't know. We're so busy farming and trying to clean grain and export that we just haven't been having the time to spend on marketing like we probably should be. And I think that we're going to complement each other really well. I think we're able to be kind of vertically integrated and ship products out the door, and yeah, work hand in hand with the Regenified team. It's been so far so good.
I think I'd famously heard too that you were very anti-certification.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is very true. So, and when Tanis as well, when Tanis and I met with Solar in Anaheim at the Expo West last year, and they kind of walked us through like the whole thought process behind the tiers, because that was always my problem with, like, we had some organic farmers around us, and you know, it was always, and these guys were organic by neglect. You know, I've always said there's organic by intent and organic by neglect, and these guys were the latter. And they've all exited that since, and because it was always this list of things to not do, right? Where I really like this list of things to do, you know, and then building upon that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I really drug my feet with any sort of certification. I really hate labeling. You know, I wanted to be able to do what we do and not have to worry about it. But as I learned more about Regenified, and yeah, I had a lot of meetings just to make sure it was a good fit for us. And it really was, when it encourages growth and always doing better, which is what we really focus on. Yeah, it seemed like a good fit. And like Derek said, we were really being able to have someone to help with a little bit of marketing and to distinguish our products a little bit, you know, from the others. It just, yeah, seemed like a good fit. So we went for it.
And a little bit too. I mean, specifically, what was it about Regenified that stood out to you that really helped kind of turn that tide in your minds?
I think for me, it was the tier system. You know, we work with a lot of groups, and everyone wants to define regeneration, and they want to figure out, you know, how can we, you know, a lot of people want to do certifications, and, you know, what boxes do you need to check off in order to be considered a regenerative farm? And it just didn't really feel like that would ever work. So the tier system is what I thought was really exciting. And it was very nervous. We were very nervous when we had, you know, our farm evaluated to a great extent. So it was exciting to see where we fit on that tier too. It was very encouraging and kind of exciting.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, it's really good to have the data. I mean, I think that was something that one of the big mistakes we made back in the day was when we started making changes. We didn't benchmark anything. We didn't, you know, we just started making changes and trying things, and one thing led to another, and 10 years goes by. But we just purchased a significant tract of land from a neighbor, and so this was the first year farming it. So it's really cool now that we've got that kind of benchmark. We have all the data from like our past management and this farm, and it's going to be really nice to come back every 3 years and you know, revisit that and see where you know, how it's gone. I think it's just the whole system is good.
The standard, yeah. Very good. Thank you so much. Steve, hi, Steve Groff.
Hey, good evening.
Good evening. Same question for you. I'd be really curious to know, you know, why you wanted to become certified as a regenerative operation, and why now?
Well, I can see a theme developing here. I was against certifications, I thought I got a great story. And I want to be on my own. I want to stand on my own. I don't need anybody else to put a rubber stamp on it. And also the certifications can tend to sometimes build walls, divisions among farmers, can cause confusion sometimes. What does it really mean? But then I knew about Regenified was being formed. I'd heard about it, and the first chance I got to look would have been maybe a year and a half ago, whenever it came out, and I read everything and thought, well, that's good. I think they're doing a good thing, Gabe and everybody. That's great. But it wasn't until I heard Solar a year and a couple months ago and met Solar and heard how it's set up, and it's way more than I thought. And I was like, oh, this could be interesting. But what really changed my mind was the thought of I can't personally meet all my end users, my customers. They have no clue who Steve Groff is. They have no clue who Cedar Meadow Farm is. But if there's a stamp of approval on there, if there's a certification on my food that I grow, consumers are looking for that. And if it's a stamp of approval, if it's a certification that has integrity, then maybe I should think about this. And actually, I didn't think about it very long. I kind of dove right in, and a mere 6 months later had my certification. So that's kind of my story of why Regenified.
Amazing.
We see that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and that sort of speaks to that shorthand that you mentioned, Sam, that customers are looking for. When it's a direct customer product, they don't really have the time to look thoroughly at things sometimes. So seeing that shorthand seal is a quick verification for them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Brandon Bach, good evening.
So I guess I'm not going to say I was forced into being Regenified, but that's somewhat how it went. I was fortunate enough to be asked to grow wheat for Bread Labs, kind of through the King Arthur sales agreement there. But that being said, even though that was a requirement for growing their product, looking into Regenified, it was really in the early stages before you guys were actually kind of when you were first starting. So therefore, there was just a lot of unknowns yet with how it was going to be structured. That being said, Gabe, Alan, Doug, everybody that was involved with Regenified, I had already met them through Understanding Ag, Soil Health Academy. They just ran a really clean ship. They had a lot of the same values that I have as a producer. And, Sam and Kathleen nailed it. We have to avoid the greenwashing thing. We've done a lot of work to set our farms apart from neighbors, and we're raising food that is better for human health. It just flat is. We can do the testing to prove that it doesn't have chemical residues in it. It's more nutrient dense, and I don't want my neighbors that are trying to stomp me out to be able to sell into that same market. So I saw there was a need for some sort of a verification process. It's just, like everybody said, I don't love having people out on all my fields either, but the one thing that actually surprised me by having them out there on my fields, it was an unbiased view of my land. And I actually spent a day with Doug the first year and another day this year touring all my fields while they're taking tests. And honestly, I knew where I was going to do well, and I knew where we weren't going to do well just because of my management, and it showed up on all the testing. So that was pretty awesome to see that I knew ahead of time where I was passing and failing, and where we need to improve. So it was nice to see that the testing backed up what I already knew was going to happen.
Absolutely. And I'll share, like Brandon shared, that he provided grains for King Arthur ultimately for that regenerative blend flour. And something that I tend to do every couple of weeks is I read the customer reviews on that flour. And there's so many reasons I think why people are getting behind regenerative. There's supporting the farmers, there's supporting the animals, it's supporting the planet. Some of these people are just bakers who are flat out saying this tastes really good. There's a nuttiness about this. There's a texture and a profile that people can't put their finger on, but they really appreciate it. So I think overall, again, that feeds into the food density as well, nutrient density. There's a real difference with this food. You can taste it.
That's a good point.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I feel like we're in a good spot to open up, Gabe, to any Q&A.
Great, thank you, everyone. So the first question, and I'll direct this one to Kathleen, that comes up is a person asks, will you be working with Simple Mills?
We would love to. We'd love to. Have them call me.
Yeah. And I'll actually say that Understanding Ag is working with Simple Mills on a number of projects, so that's a good thing. So hopefully Regenified will have the opportunity shortly also.
Absolutely. And I'll just add that, I think really working with grain-based products is becoming a little bit of a niche for us, based off some of our bigger clients like Maker's Mark and King Arthur Baking. So that's an area we feel really comfortable. We're growing a really strong farmer network in that space. So that would be a great brand to have in the network as well.
Mm-hmm. So the next question, kind of a long one, and I'm going to start with the farmers on this one, and then I'm going to ask Alan and Salar and anyone else who wants to jump in on it. But this person asks, if the mission is to increase regenerative agriculture practices, wouldn't making the products at the same price, in other words, not charge a premium, and making it available to all consumers, be a better tactic? Steve Groff, I'm going to start with you.
Well, that's, there's a lot of wide range of thoughts on that, even for me, myself. And I understand both sides of the coin. I understand that food prices have gone up, I think like 18% or so in the last year. I haven't seen that on my, for what I'm getting for my price of the produce that I grow, and I have costs, and they have definitely gone up. Mm-hmm. So that question is very difficult to answer because there's so many variables and so different sides of it. But when you go in the store, if you have a conventional tomato, an organic tomato, and we'll say a Regenified tomato, I think that's where the question is coming at here. And I could theoretically say that I can grow my regenerative tomato cheaper. But when I look back over the last 10, 30 years or so, I've been doing this, all the mistakes I made, to get to this point, and, just being a pioneer in the whole business here, those of us farmers that represented, we can well relate. We've been on the cutting edge. We did not have a lot of help when we started, and Gabe, you can relate to that too. And so there's part of me that feels like it would be nice to get a little reward for some of that, but then again, I'm not going to get too hung up on it. I think the market will determine the price of the regenerative category as it moves forward, and we'll see how it turns out. So I may not have answered that question, but it's one of those questions that have a lot of variables to it. And I hope that's helpful to understand a little bit.
Okay. Brandon, do you have something to add there?
I guess I would say this is, honestly, our regenerative products are better. It's just the way it is. So since when do you get to buy something that's better for the same amount of money? And that being said, also, it's not that our cost of production is necessarily always cheaper. Like for, say, one example, just say we have uneven crop that we can't straight harvest. So we may have to go out with a swather, run a pickup header just so we don't spray a pre-harvest desiccant chemical on it that's bad for human health. And I mean, I'm taking enough pride in my product that I'm going to sell that I'm not doing that anymore. So if I have to add expense to my operation to provide a healthier product, I'm willing to do it. But therefore, we do have to offset some of those costs at times. So that's a really loaded question, and every operation's different. But ultimately, I think we have a better product, and I think it's worth more money.
Yeah, and the data that Kathleen showed certainly proves that out. Derek and Tanis, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Steve and Brandon both hit on kind of a lot of the same things that we feel, think the same way. I guess part of this journey of, decommoditizing our food system, it takes a little more effort and takes a little more time. And, sometimes we don't get to take part in some of those efficiencies of scale, and so sometimes that is, there's some costs associated with that. But with that also comes the 100% transparency that comes with, the Regenified, right? For us, because it's growing here and clean and milled and packaged and shipped, that there's a lot of value in that, and then we can couple that now with the nutrient testing and phytochemical testing we've been doing. And I think there's a lot of value in that customers can see and understand, compared to just this absolute faceless commoditized food that they've been buying, that they don't know where it come from or who made it or grew it or processed it or how old it is, or it's a completely different experience with what we're doing.
Exactly right. Salar, I'm going to call on you next. I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure.
You should introduce yourself first, Salar.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Solar. I'm the CEO of Regenified, and it's a pleasure to be here to first of all hear the team to present, but also see Tanis, Derek, Steve, and also Brandon too. Brandon, you and I got to catch up soon. I've got a couple of questions for you. Answering the question, I don't think there is any wrong or right answer. I actually agree with you. But to your surprise, and many of our attendees on this call, corporations are not willing to cut their profits to pay farmers more. If there is an opportunity that consumers are willing, like Solar, to pay $11 for a regenerative dozen egg, which I do with pleasure, why don't we use that opportunity and make sure that the farmers are getting a premium, to recognize their effort, to reward them for it? But it's going to take time. It's going to take time until we have a supply chain that is efficient enough for corporations to be okay with not seeing their profit to be cut significantly, but for those products to be affordable by consumers. Our mission is to transition the supply chain. Our mission is not to relate to people in cities. We want to relate to people in rural communities, in regional communities, all over America and Canada and beyond. So it's important for us to be able to have all the produce available that are grown regeneratively in anyone's local grocery chain, or available at a fingertip of click and order. To that point, I'm pleased to say that last week, one of the grocery chains in the West Coast, New Seasons Market, launched an all-beef hot dog that is a product of beef that comes from Carmen Ranch, one of the certified Regenified ranches. The product contains 99% beef, and the rest of it are organic spices like paprika and else. And it's sold at a conventional price, because they figured out if they go directly to the rancher and procure the beef and try to do their own manufacturing, they can have the same margin as a premium organic product. So that product is now certified Regenified, approved by FSIS, and sold at conventional pricing for anyone who can enjoy it. So we will see more of the SKUs of product becoming available, not necessarily at a premium to organic or same as organic, but at a different variety of prices. And that is what is very promising, because ultimately, as Sam and Kathleen mentioned, consumers want to buy the story. It's not the product necessarily. I hope that answered.
Alan, please.
So several things here. And a lot of this are things that consumers don't realize. First of all commodity foods are heavily subsidized.
Yeah.
You just think they're cheap as a consumer, but your taxpayer dollars are paying quite a bit to go to the subsidy of those foods. So if the farmers were not subsidized for the commodity foods, it would be costing you a lot more. But again, remember, you're still paying it through your taxpayer dollars. That's number one. Number two is that we have to realize that with many of the commodity foods, particularly the proteins, processing costs post-farm, post-ranch are literally a fourth to a third of what ours are post-farm, post-ranch. So even if we do produce it cheaper on farm, on ranch, we're paying significantly more for those processing and packaging and transportation costs than the major companies are. So that's another factor that's reality. But here's another reality, and that is that if you price food like you need to price it for true apples to apples comparison, you've got to price it by the pound, pound to pound. So let me ask you this. Do you know what you're paying for a bag of potato chips by the pound? Typically anywhere from $5 to over $16 a pound for a bag of potato chips. Okay. You can buy my grass-fed beef all day long for cheaper than you can buy most brands of potato chips. And do you know what, if you bought a McDonald's quarter pounder, you pay for that. Do you know what that beef is costing you by the pound? $15.62 a pound. Again, you can buy our grass-fed ground beef for $8 a pound all day long. Okay, a Chick-fil-A sandwich. When you price that Chick-fil-A, that chicken fillet in that sandwich by the pound, you're paying over $22 a pound. And we can keep going. Taco Bell, over $24 a pound for the ground beef in it. So really, commodity food is cheap? I don't think it's cheap at all.
Thank you, Alan. And I'll just briefly add to that. I still think that the biggest hidden cost in all of this is the cost of healthcare that's associated with our current production model. It's appalling what's considered food nowadays. I contend that the majority of people don't eat food, they eat food-like substances. And that's contributing to the healthcare crisis we have, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And I really think that it's up to the consumer. And if the consumer would really figure in the cost they're paying for healthcare, medications, doctors, etc., boy, that food that these panelists are selling here, all of a sudden it's dirt cheap. And dirt's the wrong word to use there, soil cheap maybe, but it is very inexpensive compared to commodity type prices. So with that, moving on, Craig asks, Whole Foods are requiring regenerative products. Are suppliers willing to create a partnership with farmers to help reduce the risk of transition? The suppliers are paying a premium, but it seems that most of the cost and risk is placed on the farmer. How do we shift that approach? Kathleen, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we are actually seeing a fair number of partnerships in that way. Many of the brands that I work with, are looking to get their farms certified, and they're not transitioning, they're not pushing that cost off to the farms. They're actually sponsoring the cost of the verification and certification of the farm. So the brand will pay for the certification for their supplier farm. Other times, a brand looks to our network of already certified farms and they source from those farms. So we do see a fair number of partnerships where the brand is actually footing the bill for the certification and using that product because they want to use our seal in their package. And to do that, they have to get at least 75% of their ingredients to be Regenified certified. And then what else? What else was part of that question?
They just wanted to know how do we shift the cost of production of those risks associated? Yes.
Yeah, and I guess the other way that we sort of we shift the risk at least is the tiered system that we allow our farmers to enter into, that they don't have to immediately transition their entire farm operation to regenerative. If that doesn't work for their plans, they can shift just a couple fields, test it, see how it goes. I mean, we're always seeing that they see it goes pretty well and they want to invest more, but that does shift the risk a little bit, that they're not going to risk losing everything because they're totally doing their farming in a completely different way than they did last year.
If I may, Kathleen is absolutely right. And I'll give you another example. We have a rice producer that is growing rice, and there are a number of major retailers here in the United States. And they spoke to one of those retailers and said, hey, we have to have a crop rotation as part of our regenerative plan. So will you be open to purchasing our soybean and our sesame if we were to grow those as part of our rotational system? And that supermarket, which is Publix, told them, absolutely, we love your brand and we would like to see more products coming out of your farm. So I think that's another added layer, and I'm hoping we can bring that to Canada more and more to see folks like Derek and Tanis and others who are growing multiple products. It's not only the major product that goes to a simple or a single grocery chain, but also building a more diverse range of product lines that could appear on grocery chain shelves would be another approach to de-risk those transitions and progress.
Thank you, Salar. The next question, Sue asks, are you seeing interest from heirloom variety growers as they are usually more nutritionally dense than industrially grown crops? And I think they need to separate the two. There's a big difference between heirloom varieties, and we have to separate just heirloom varieties and the soil on which those crops are grown in. So I'm going to start with Derek and Tanis, and then Alan, I'm going to ask you to talk about the different soil makes because of the testing that you've done. Derek and Tanis, you've grown some heirloom varieties. What are you seeing?
Oh, it's a bit of a loaded question for us considering the meeting we just had last week, going over some of our results. But we have been growing predominantly heirloom grains on our farm for a few years now. Most people actually think we're organic because of that. We grow spelt, denine corn, red fife, corazan is our primary cereal crops. But recently we've started, in the last few years, we started growing a 7 variety mix of, well, some recent spring wheats and some older spring wheats, but it's just a mix. We grow 7 varieties together every year, and year after year they're grown and harvested together and then replanted the following year. Just trying to sort of make the best use of epigenetics and maybe eventually build a variety that works really well in Minton, Saskatchewan. And I was under the understanding that heirloom varieties were always better nutritionally and phytochemically, but after the meeting we had, and maybe Salar can touch, he probably has a better memory of what we saw, but it wasn't exactly what we thought. The spring wheat, Salar, maybe you want to chime in, but I think the spring wheat and the rye were better.
Yep. In fact, I believe, and I may be off by a few percent, I think there was a difference of 25% in overall phytochemicals and phytonutrients profile for your 7 variety versus rye. Especially in certain phytochemicals, Stefan mentioned that are incredibly significant to human health. Also, there is another interesting one that Derek, maybe you want to mention about how processing could impact nutritional removal.
Yeah, no. So we had sent in nine of our samples and two competitive grains, I guess you want to call them. And the only we sent, because of the mill here, we sent in or spring wheat, we sent in a sifted and an unsifted variety, 100% whole grain, and then a 100 mesh sift for us, which is, it removes say about 14% of the total product, which is actually quite a low amount considering 100 mesh sift. But regardless, removing that 15%, call it, of the total volume, removed about 50% of the phytochemicals. It was significant. So we're gonna send a lot more whole grain samples in the next couple of weeks. We didn't realize it was that significant. And the other real shocker for us was how good the sifted rye was still better than most of the other products we had. So rye was a real shocker for us.
Okay, thank you, Derek and Tanis. Now, though, because I think one major component that we're not talking about here is the health of the soil and the difference that makes in these phytochemical compounds. Alan, would you talk about that, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So in this phytonutrient research that we've been working on with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet and his team, one thing that has become crystal clear is that the health of the soil has everything to do with the phytonutrient richness and total nutrient density in any product. So if you take the same heirloom variety and you try to grow that in a worn out soil, then it's not going to just naturally have the nutrient density. It's the microbes in the soil that put those nutrients into those plants. And so the more we work at improving, particularly that microbial profile and total living microbial biomass in the soil, the better the nutrient profile and the phytonutrient content we're going to have in practically anything. And it doesn't matter what it is, the plants, the fruits, the vegetables, and it's going to transfer to our animal protein. So the cattle that are eating those plants, the pigs, the chickens, all of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the point. Thank you, Alan, that I was trying to make. We can't go making blanket statements that heirloom is better than conventional. It's going to be a number of factors, but it's going to be strongly correlated to the health of that soil ecosystem. And so it'll be really interesting for all the farmers to start comparing the phytochemical nutrients in their production and correlate that to the health of the soil, what we're seeing. So moving along, because we're getting a number of questions, I'm going to direct this one at Salar, and there's a number of questions that are kind of the same, talking about the number of certifications that are out there, and there are several other certifications mentioned. But Salar, why don't you just talk about the different certifications from how do they
Sure.
differentiated, and does a consumer need to worry about that? Which
Sure.
certification is which?
Yeah, great question. Every week we see a certification verification company pop in, which is interesting. But primarily in the US, there are 3 certification companies that are widely accepted and approved by Whole Foods Market and a few other supermarkets. One is Land to Market by Savory Institute. One is Regenerative Organic Certified from Regenerative Organic Alliance, or ROC or ROC, and Regenified is another one. Now, we at Regenified believe whoever is trying to take a right step towards transitioning to regenerative practices deserves a round of applause, and they're doing God's work in that sense. And we completely support and recognize everyone who is trying to do the right thing. And we believe that farmers need to have a choice, consumers need to have choice, and that choice needs to be available for everyone to relate to those stories or those requirements or specifications. Regenified is an independent third-party verification certification company. We are not affiliated with any corporations. We are not funded by any major brand or corporations like some of other certification companies. Regenified runs and operates under my leadership, and I have a board of directors that are report to their independent. So I'm not swayed by another organization in making the right decision for the regenerative movement on behalf of Regenified. We are simply here to protect the narrative around regenerative agriculture. So we are not, yes, we are different than you mentioned Liz Haney's regenerative verified program, correct? And if anyone wants to make a comment about that, no problem, please jump in. And we are aware that there might be confusions about different certification programs amongst consumers. We are investing heavily in regenerative agriculture movement, financially and non-financially, to make sure consumers are recipients of transparent communication. We want to just tell the story of your operation and the brands that are supporting to procure from you guys. We are not here to put anyone down or say that Regenified is better than anyone else. We are just very focused on transitioning the supply chain to regenerative ag.
Yeah, very, very well said, Salar. I would add a couple of things to that, though, and the fact that, and you hit the nail on the head when you said that Regenified is an independent third party. It does not sell any products, and it does not do any consulting. And I think that, along with probably the most comprehensive protocol and standards out there, separate it in many respects.
And sorry, I forgot to mention this, Gabe. Apologies for a moment. Regenified, as of today, we are the first and only third-party regenerative verification certification program to be recognized and approved by USDA Food Safety Inspection Services, meaning that if you have Regenified certification or certificate, you're automatically approved to include a regenerative claim on a product on an expedited process with FSIS.
Yeah, the only one. That's correct. Next question. I'm going to call on Doug Peterson. So Doug, come on, please. My friend Graham Han. Graham, it's good to see you listening in this evening. Asked, what happens if outcomes go backwards? So Doug is the Chief Scientific Officer with Regenified. Doug, I'll ask you to answer that question, please.
Hey, thanks, Gabe. We put a lot of thought into developing this program, and that's why it's based on both practices as well as outcomes. And so we knew first and foremost we had to have at least some practice requirements. We wanted to ensure that that producers of all types were going to go down the right road. Many of them were doing it on their own, but others needed a little bit of guidance to head down that right road. So that's why this is both a practice and an outcomes-based evaluation. We're going to we have some specific requirements of practices based on the principles of soil health and the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. And so we're pretty confident that if producers following our practice requirements, that there's not much chance that they're going to go backwards from an outcomes standpoint. Now, if they do, we're gonna dive deep and try to figure out why. If it's something, a drought, for example, if it's something like that is totally out of their hands, then we'll have an evaluation process to try to get through that. If they simply ignore the standards and ignore our practice requirements, then obviously they're gonna be asked to exit the program at that point. So again, it's both practice and outcomes based, and we feel pretty confident if they're following the practices that they're not going to necessarily go backwards.
Thank you. And Doug, stay on, because the next question will come to you also. The attendee asked, what is your definition of regenerative red meat? Now, Doug, I'm not going to ask you to define regenerative red meat. but instead, maybe you could outline some of the protocols for the pastured proteins.
So, from a practice standpoint, we're going to evaluate the land first and foremost, whether that is, beef or lamb or chicken. We're going to evaluate those rest periods. We're going to evaluate the grazing periods. We're going to evaluate what their management is doing to improve plant diversity. We're going to evaluate ground cover, canopy cover. Those are some of the practices and the outcomes that we're going to evaluate, regardless of what type of protein it is. It's going to be an evaluation of that forage management first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. And Doug, would you just address briefly the requirements for pasture and being on pasture and how that's related to the context of the environment?
So, we believe that all animals should be able to, express their natural instincts, right? Whether that's grazing, whether that's scratching or hunting, so pecking. So we have requirements that the animals have to be on pasture. They can't be in any kind of a confinement system. There has to be adequate feed, adequate water. There has to be shade, for example, if it's a species that needs shade, chickens, for example. So we have several things that we evaluate from that standpoint, so that the animals or birds, whatever they are, can express those natural instincts.
Okay, thank you. And next question, moving on, I'll ask, I see Kathleen, maybe there she is. Kathleen and Sam to take this one. I'll start with you, Kathleen. Are all Regenified products consumer goods? Is there a market space for commodities?
There definitely is a marketplace for commodities. I think one of the places we're looking now, we have our Regenified certified eggs. We're looking for feed for those chickens that are Regenified certified. So certainly, yeah, we're definitely not all consumer goods. We also have commodities.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Yeah, we need more commodities. We need supply today. We're seeing increased demand. It's very hard to predict. It comes in overnight, as you can imagine, but it's coming in, and there is a real demand for these commodities. We've got, distilleries. We've got, as Kathleen said, poultry operations. So one of the requirements for poultry is for them to progress to a higher tier, they require regenerative feed. So the corn, the soy, the flax, the wheat, all of that's in demand right now. And it's very important geographically that we have these networks, that we have this supply geographically close to where these requests come through. So that's certainly an area that we're very focused on working with within the commodities.
Yep. Anyone else? Anything to add there? The next one is a comment, but I'm going to ask Alan to comment on this because I think it deserves a comment. To pay $11 for a dozen eggs is ridiculous. Alan, you want to talk about that from a nutrient standpoint and compare the prices between commodity eggs?
Absolutely. And I guess my first comment was, if you care about your health, it's ridiculous to buy commodity eggs. Yeah. So what is your health worth? Yeah. Is the real bottom line here. What is your health worth? And what are you paying for medical care? What we are finding very definitively, again, from this phytonutrient research, is that the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory benefits, the heart health benefits, anti-cancer properties, all of those things are incredibly powerful in these phytonutrient-rich foods that are produced from regenerative practices. So again, my question would be, what is your health worth, and what is the health of your family worth?
Exactly. Exactly. Anyone else care to comment on that? I know we all have opinions,
I think
strong ones.
for me, I just love the Regenified certified seal on those packages. You know, that's why I pay $11 for it, because I have every confidence in how they were raised.
Regenified is a mark of confidence, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah. So David asks, with current commodity prices lower than break even and probably trending lower, do you feel that there will be more interest from the chemical farming side? And I'm sure they mean moving down the regenerative path. Brandon, what do you think? What are your neighbors saying?
Well, we just came off of a pretty high cycle in commodity prices. And guess what? Nobody wants to change when they're making money. So I do believe there's going to be more people entertaining and looking to change. Kind of when I started back in 2018, we were coming off of a low in commodity prices, and there was a pile of interest in regenerative practices back then, cover cropping. And as soon as farmers start making money again, they forget all about it. And unfortunately, and so yes, I do believe there's going to be a lot more interest in people to change. I've actually got neighbors, friends of mine that are in the similar age group that they've been calling now recently, wondering how they can get involved. And what I tell them is you should have started about 5 years ago when you had money to spend on it, because it's you don't want to get too far down the debt path because it's hard to dig out of a hole. But yes, I do think you're correct. There will be more and more people being open-minded about change.
Yep. Steve, what are you seeing?
Oh yeah, it's almost every regenerative farmer now, veteran farmer, got into it from one way or another, that there's an economic reason. And the thing of it is that it takes pain for farmers, or for anybody in business or even personal decisions in life, to make a change. And financial issues can be a expressed or felt pain, if you will, pain point. So I do believe that that you're exactly right. It's going to cause people to look at it. But as Brandon said, you should have been doing this 5 years ago. I remember I was in Illinois, and a guy asked me, and I knew it was in some of the best corn growing area in the world, and he goes, "Do you think cover crops are going to pay?" And I said, "No, they're not going to pay for you." And I just wanted to get a response out of him, kind of, and he said, because my average corn yield is 250 bushel, year in, year out. And I remember saying this, again, this was a couple years ago, 5 years ago or more. I said, well, what if the price of nitrogen doubles? And he said, well, yeah, that could be a reason to save the nitrogen and also create nitrogen with legumes. I said, why don't you try it in 40 acres? So you're ready when that time comes. And I don't know what the guy did, but 2 years ago, the price of nitrogen did double. And they're just a case in point where economics sometimes can drive people to this. So I do think it will cause some people to look into it. But then again, I would say, just because they think they may get a premium, that just doesn't magically always happen either. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. People will look into it, lower commodity prices, but it's going to be different for everybody.
Yep. Derek, Dennis, your thoughts?
Sorry, there we got her. Now we're live. Yeah, I think so. It's like Brandon said, it's no one wants to change when they're making money. They're comfortable, right? But I kind of look at this a little bit different than a lot of people, and I see the risk in not transitioning. People want this. I don't know why they want to get paid to transition. Paid to do what? right? I mean, I really think that the risk is not transitioning. I mean, for us, it was about building resilience in our system because we live in a low rainfall system, but I mean, you have the same problem in a high rainfall system. It's about building resiliency because we get these high intensity, short duration rainfall events, and it's, like Jimmy Emmons says it best. It's like, how much rain did you get? All of it. That's what I want to do. When we get rain, the first thing I do in the last 5 minutes of the rain, I go drive around and look at my fields so I can see how our system is performing. So and by all means, we're not there. I mean, we're still, this is a never ending journey for us. But I think that, I think I got off topic a little bit, but I do think that the risk is not in transitioning, and maybe now is the time that we'll get some new people and we'll get some interest, and maybe that's the thing that they need. I mean, everybody's different. We all operate differently, right? And maybe that's the thing that they need to get them over the hump and get them looking at different systems and different ways of farming. This is the time. Low commodity cycles is when we get the phone calls about intercropping. I'm interested in intercropping. 2 years ago, when there was $20 canola, nobody called about intercropping. But now when things are different, that things change.
Yep.
Could I say one more thing?
David asks, is the nutrient testing results being passed on to the consumer, or is there a way for consumers to obtain those nutrient test results?
Oh, for sure. We're going to be sharing those. There's something we have Christine is our CMO. She's like a marketing all-star, and she's definitely got it on her to-do list to get this really widely out there on our social media and share it, when we're at this conference this week. And beyond that, these types of results are getting out there. They're not our results, but just this week, an organization called the Nutrient Density Alliance published a white paper about the nutrient density of regeneratively grown products. So it is getting out there. There's buzz around this. This is, definitely getting some attention, and we're going to continue to shout about it as well because we're very excited.
And since January, we started our conversations with FDA in the United States, bringing to their attention some of the nutrient testing results that we are getting. And on our next quarterly call, we are in fact decided to present the nutrient density test from Tanis and Derek, if they're willing to share those results for us to present to FDA, because those are the alarming statistics that I think folks need to wake up to, because ultimately food is health.
Thank you.
If I could chime into that as well, in terms of sharing with the consumer from a Regenified perspective, another area that we really focus on, Solaris mentioned it, we brought it up, telling the story, right? So one of the areas that we're actively building out on our website today is farmer profile pages for our Regenified operations. And this is a chance to tell that story. It's a big piece of it. So sharing their tier ranking, sharing their pictures of their operation, where to find those products, as well as their nutrient density testing. I think there's so much power in transparency here. This is a beautiful movement. It's a beautiful practice. There's nothing to hide. I think that's going to be a really great shift for consumers to be able to see where their food is coming from, and understanding all of those details in a digestible way. So we're very excited to get that project underway.
Yep. Very good. Doug, this one's for you. As a small livestock producer, how liable am I for the practices of the producers I buy feed from? Hay for beef and grains for chickens. And I'm assuming that what they're talking about is, what Ethan is talking about is, if he's purchasing feed for his livestock, how does that fit into the verification certification process?
You bet. And I should have outlined that earlier. I think Sam hit on it just a minute. As part of our verification protocol, we do have a requirement that the feed meets the same percentages as the land as you move up the tiers. So if you're in tier 4, then 60 to 80% of the feed, whether it's purchased, raised, no matter what kind of feed it is, it also has to meet our Regenified criteria. So It can be purchased, it can be raised, but it does have to meet that criteria as you move up through the tiers. That was one thing that we felt really strongly about when we started this, was that, to me, it didn't make sense that you could verify the land that the animals were on, but you could buy any amount of feed and bring it in, and not worry about the land where it was produced, right? In the case of poultry, for example, those pastured chickens may be running on, just 5 or 10 acres, but the grain for those chickens is coming from 50 or 60 acres. And so, we just felt really strongly that it had to incorporate a component of the feed. And so, but we didn't want to make it any different than the land requirement. So that's why the percentage of the feed requirement is the same as the land as you move up the tiers.
Another question for you, Doug. How do you see the Regenified protocol fitting into a system like sugarcane production?
That's a good question. There are a handful of crops that are really, really tough to be regenerative. Cotton, rice is a little tougher, sugarcane. So what we generally look at is the overall rotation. I think a lot of those crops that are hard on the land like that have production methods that require that whole plant removal, that's where a long-term rotation, so you have a building period and then a harvesting period, is about the only way that that's going to work in a truly regenerative system.
Mm-hmm. We have several comments here. This one's says a comment of praise, saying that conventional farmers get paid by weights with very little regard to nutrition. And if we're going to feed a growing population, the key is going to be to produce more nutrients per acre, which is exactly what we're talking about. And then Chris talks about, when we show the data, they don't ask how much, they ask, where can I get some? The nutritional benefits more than pay for itself. Yeah. Another comment about the carbon currency path. There seems to be more interest in that. What do you guys think about it? Anyone want to tackle the carbon question?
I'm happy to start.
You want to tackle that
Yeah,
one, please?
for sure. Yeah, having had a stint for a brief 7 months on carbon credits world, I can confidently say that in a tune of about $15 billion have been invested in or betted or gambled on certain companies to activate carbon credit marketplaces, not only US and in Canada and elsewhere too. We believe that Regenified's position is this. We believe the world is not ready for a carbon credit market for a couple of reasons. One, of technical challenges. There are no accurate and a scalable way of quantifying carbon in all its forms. Simply taking a couple of soil samples doesn't assure you how much carbon you have in soil, but it requires more rigorous and more accurate or more advanced technologies to be able to make it accessible and scalable. Although there are some good programs that are doing the best possible to be able to get as much or as close to those results as possible. But at this moment of time, we at Regenified believe that the markets are not there, and therefore do not really endorse anyone generally, never mind a carbon credit program. And number two, we believe that the offset buyers, the carbon credit buyers, are usually the emitters of such programs, and emitters are largely corporations in oil and gas and transportation, in food manufacturing, et cetera. They're taking more interest in offsetting, actually in setting rather than offsetting, meaning that they want to really address their emission sources by way of agriculture, by way of transportation, rather than try to offset their emission through purchasing carbon credits. Hence, companies like Maker's Mark and others are committed to regenerative agriculture to really inset those emissions as opposed to purchasing credits for offsetting them. I hope that was helpful. But we are looking forward to seeing if there is a market, it's an equitable one that rewards farmers fairly.
Thank you, Salar. One final question for this evening. The local bank accused me that I was lucky to go down the regenerative path with no debt, etc. So I flipped it on him. No, you're wrong. It's a choice made by my wife and I. We never bought new equipment, and we did not take on new debt, and we are now free to choose how we farm. Great way to end, Jerry. Great way to end. Thank you for that comment. I just want to remind everyone, next Thursday, March 14th at 7 p.m., we'll be having another webinar, Picking the Low-Hanging Fruit, Regenerative Tips to Save You Money Now with Understanding Ag consultant Eric Fuchs. I want to thank the presenters, Kathleen and Samantha, and thank you to Steve and Brandon and Derek and Tanis for being on with us this evening. With that, I wish everyone a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.